This is Jonaquin Martinez Estrella, who's facing charges of murder, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, and gang assault in New York City. Late night on June 20th, 2018, Estrella, along with his fellow gang members, Rivera, Garcia, Muniz, and Hernandez, brutally attacked and killed 15-year-old Lisandro Guzman Feliz. According to family members, Feliz was on his way home from a friend's house when Estrella, who was driving by with his friends, mistook Feliz for a rival gang member. They chased Feliz into a nearby bodega, where he attempted to hide behind the counter. It was a deadly game of hide and seek, and Feliz was outnumbered. The gang members dragged Feliz outside, where he's ambushed. Estrella, armed with a knife, cut Feliz's neck before shoving him back toward the bodega. Mortally wounded, Feliz sought for help from the bodega's owner, but he pointed Feliz towards St. Barnabas Hospital, 2 blocks away. Stumbling toward the hospital, he begged onlookers to call 911. He ran across the street, but quickly lost strength. Passerby discovered Feliz's body by the hospital's entrance. They rushed him into the hospital, but it was too late. Feliz passed away from blood loss later that evening. Using bodega's camera footage, police were able to identify Feliz's attackers and charge him with first-degree murder. In court, all 5 gang members were tried at the same time, and they showed no remorse. One gang member, Kevin Alvarez, committed the ultimate betrayal. Alvarez, who helped drag Feliz out of the bodega, testified against his fellow gang members in exchange for a lesser charge. Estrella, who dealt the final fatal blow, was sentenced to life in prison. Garcia, Santiago, and Muniz received 25 to life, while Rivera got 23 to life. No cameras were allowed in court, but they didn't have to be. After the murderers were sentenced to life, this was their mother's reaction. These vicious gang members won't be able to kill another innocent person again. But what happens when a gang member orchestrates serial murders from behind prison walls? This is George Joel Thomas, who's facing 52 charges, which include 7 counts of murder and 3 counts of gang activity in South Africa. Thomas was immersed in criminal activity from the moment he was born. When he was 9, he received his first conviction for breaking and entering. Feeling merciful, the judge let 9-year-old Thomas off with a warning. But just 6 years later, he was back in court for robbery. He was sent to a reformatory school, but it didn't work. Over the next 3 decades, Thomas commits over 20 crimes, including robbery, drug possession, assault, and, worst of all, murder. Things culminated when his gang, the 28's Prisons Gang, began a violent rivalry with a neighboring gang. Thomas killed 2 people before being caught by police. But if you thought that'd be the end of his crimes, think again.
You must understand that particularly Thomas Cavett was quite a very feared man. He would not only, he would also threaten and scare some of us.
Sitting in solitary confinement, Thomas would orchestrate the assassinations of 5 of the people testifying against him. After that, he was forbidden from outside communication. And after years of trials, it was finally time for Thomas to learn his sentence.
It went further that while you were in custody, through your actions on those who testified against you, you sent a strong message that you won't be stopped through the law of the land. The message was also on members of the police, that your power was stronger than previously thought.
The judge gave Thomas 7 life sentences for the 7 murders, in addition to 152 years for his lesser crimes. There's no denying the atrocities of Thomas's crimes. But how does that compare to a celebrity who's on trial for something that might not even exist? This is Jeffrey Williams, better known as Young Thug, who's been charged with founding a violent street gang on the streets of Atlanta, Georgia. Williams has been rapping about gang life since 2010. However, in 2016, he made it official. He founded his label, Young Stoner Life Records, or YSL for short. But after a sudden increase in crime rates, Atlanta prosecutors charged Williams with starting more than just a record label. Authorities arrested Williams for racketeering, alleging that YSL was a gang founded as an offshoot of the notorious Bloods gang. Now in court, prosecution claims Williams isn't the gangbanging lowlife he's accused to be. In fact, he's quite the opposite. He's holy.
You would be truly humble under God. That's what thug means.
And yeah, they're gangsters, but not criminal gangsters. Studio gangsters.
Studio gangsters. They're in the studio. They are creating music for us to listen to.
If that didn't convince you of his innocence, watch this.
What does that mean?
Blood.
YSL's co-founder threw gang signs in court while testifying that YSL wasn't involved in gang activity. But the defendants weren't the only ones acting up.
I really don't understand what's going on. I don't remember. My head hurt. They keep asking me questions about this.
This crucial witness refused to testify, making a scene on the stand.
I done had all kind of threats, man. Y'all just exploit my whole phone number on to the world. People calling my phone right now threatening me, texting my phone. I ain't had no sleep. Everybody gonna keep asking me questions, I'm gonna move on with my life, man. I ain't got time for these games.
Meanwhile, a prosecuting attorney made a deadly mistake with a gun.
Mr. Steele,
Is that right?
I need to teach you about handling weapons. Please point the muzzle always downward, no matter if it's unloaded, okay?
As if that wasn't unbelievable enough, another attorney was kicked off the case after being arrested for gang activity. Allegedly, she contacted a suspect of a street gang shooting and gave him confidential knowledge of his impending arrest, advising him to destroy evidence. With all of this nonsense, even the judge got fed up.
Yo, would you stay out of my business, Miss Love? Stay out of my business.
Trial isn't over yet, but if convicted, Williams could face up to 120 years in prison. Young Thug's accusers are having trouble producing evidence. But would 500 pounds of meth be enough evidence? This is Robert Lloyd Schellenberg, being charged with trying to smuggle drugs into China. In 2014, Schellenberg organized a shipment of tires through China, and inside those tires, he hid almost 500 pounds of meth. After learning that his translator reported him to the police, Schellenberg tried to flee, but he was arrested at the airport. In court, Schellenberg claimed he was an innocent tourist who had been framed by his translator. Meanwhile, the prosecution revealed Schellenberg's extensive history of drug crimes in Canada, including drug trafficking. And on the other side of the ocean, Canada was on high alert.
It is of extreme concern to us as a government, as it should be to all our international friends and allies, that China has chosen to begin to arbitrarily apply death penalty in cases facing, as in this case, facing a Canadian.
But would Trudeau's intervention save Schellenberg? This is the moment he found out. Schellenberg was given the death sentence. His name's notorious all across the world for his audacious behavior, but how can that compare to the infamous criminals who killed a beloved celebrity? This is Michael Boatwright and his co-conspirators Dedrick Williams and Trevon Newsom, who are all facing murder charges in Deerfield Beach, Florida. On June 18, 2018, rapper XXXTentacion had just left the bank with $50,000 in a duffel bag. He goes straight to Riva Motorsports to buy a motorcycle, but little did he know he was being followed. As he stops for motorcycles, two perpetrators tail him inside the store, while a third was waiting in a vehicle outside. Without buying anything, Tentacion leaves the store, but as he tried to exit the parking lot, he was ambushed. The getaway driver blocks the exit while the two others mob the car, threatening X at gunpoint. Tentacion's uncle, who was in the passenger seat, managed to flee. The attackers fatally shot X and stole the 50 grand. And as they drove away, they took this video. Later on, they posed next to the stolen cash and posted on Instagram, along with this video. Unsurprisingly, the killers were easily identified and arrested. In court, all 3 killers were tried at once.
Gunmen jump out and immediately put guns in the victim's face and in Leonard Kerr's face. Michael Boatwright fires several times, killing the victim at close range.
The camera evidence was damning enough, but it couldn't compare to the uncle's eyewitness testimony.
You don't come out the effing car. And he was like, with a gun. You don't come out the effing car.
With a mountain of evidence against them, the killer's lawyers were willing to do anything to shift the blame. But nobody was expecting him to do this.
Before X died, he said, if anybody kills me, it's Drake.
That's right. He blamed Drake, the famous rapper, for killing XXXTentacion. But luckily for Drake, he had proof that he wasn't even in Florida the day X was killed. Then it was time for the killers to learn their sentence.
In this case, the defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant, Dedrick Williams, in this case. The defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant, Dedrick Williams, in this case. The defendant is guilty of armed robbery as charged in the indictment. The defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. During the course of the crime committed, did the defendant, Trayvon Newsom, actually possess a firearm? Yes. You'll spend every hour and every day and every week and every year of your life in that cell. And one day, they'll come and open up that cell in the morning and you'll have passed on. And only on that day will you have served your sentence.
This deadly trio committed a heinous crime because of their greed. But what sort of person commits a murder as a precaution? This is Christopher Lockett, Jasper Green, Joshua Rooks, Quatez Clark, and Xavier Gibson, who are all facing charges of torture, sodomy, and murder in Atlanta, Georgia. On October 17, 2016, Christopher Dean left his family home for the last time.
He was an awesome dad. He had 2 little boys that he loved and would have done anything for.
His past would be involved with drug use, but he moved to a new state to get away from it, and he was finally ready to turn his life around. But he had one last drug deal to make. He went to Xavier Gibson's house, a member of the Street Disciples gang. But once he got inside, he was attacked by Gibson and his gang as he was beaten with a crowbar, tortured, and eventually executed.
They beat him to the point that his skull was actually depressed.
The violence wasn't random. Before Dean's trial, the gang figured out that Dean had been a snitch back in California. Worried he'd snitch on him too, they vowed to kill him.
They were obviously attempting to send a message to fellow gang members and anyone who might dare to testify against them that if you did it, this would be what would happen to you.
The gang members dumped Dean's body in a car in a train station parking lot. A month later, police finally tracked down the killers.
A month later, the law enforcement that responded to the scene to process it, they could see blood with the naked eye up against their refrigerators, along the sides of the walls, on their clothing, and they were just living amongst it.
With plenty of DNA evidence found at the home, the 5 gang members were brought to court. This is the moment the victim's father finally faced the killers.
Chris was getting his life on the right track. He told me he had a few things he had to do before he quit the drug business. Unfortunately, Chris never got to do things.
Christopher Lockett would be the first to learn his sentence.
Will sentence Mr. Lockett as a recidivist to life without parole.
After that, each gang member was sentenced to life without parole. Now, these criminals killed to protect their illegal way of life. But what happens when the state's biggest kingpin turns out to be a washed-up senior citizen? This is Wallace Bigger, who was charged with drug manufacturing and distribution in Saginaw, Michigan. During a sting operation in 2016, police discovered that 77-year-old Bigger was running a massive drug trafficking operation. Thanks to a shady doctor, Bigger got a prescription for hundreds of morphine pills each month, which he then sold across northern Michigan. However, despite being a kingpin, Bigger was living a life of squalor in a rundown trailer on his daughter's driveway. In court, Biggers refused to admit his guilt.
And I did not sell drugs, and I will not.
Instead of taking responsibility, he blamed the judge for his situation.
I believe the judge is biased. And I said from the start, Andrew Connie did not do a fair trial. I did not get a fair trial. Well, there. That's it.
But compared to the wiretaps, testimonies, and other evidence that the narcotics team gathered, Bigger's claims of innocence didn't stand a chance.
Did you live a big lifestyle? Were you sitting out next to the cement pond with the BMW parked to the driveway? No, you weren't. You lived a pretty crummy lifestyle. Time to time, your camper in your yard, front driveway, but it didn't stop you from being addicted to it.
The judge gave Bigger 20 to 60 years, meaning that Bigger, who's already a senior citizen, might never see the light of day again. Bigger's undercover operation left a whole town in chaos. But how much worse could it have been if he was a member of the highly dangerous MS-13 gang? This is Victor Rodas, a teenager charged with murder, abduction, and gang participation in Lynchburg, Virginia. Rodas was one of 6 MS-13 gang members who were accused of luring 17-year-old Raymond Wood to his death in 2017. It all started over a minor disagreement. According to text records, Rodas asked Wood for marijuana on March 12th. A week later, they get into a fight, and a week after that, Wood was found dead. When police traced those texts back to Rodas, he and his gang members were arrested. In court, Rodas and the gang were facing life in prison, but there was one huge problem. The murder weapon was missing. Without it, the killers had a chance to go free. It looked like all was lost, until...
I decided instead of walking back through the high grass, I would walk straight through the woods to my car. I walked about 20 yards and looked down because there was a shimmer of light that hit just right, caught my attention. I looked down on the ground and saw a dragon's head, a metal dragon's head on top of the ground.
The investigator had just given up searching the crime scene when he tripped over the murder weapon, this huge decorated dragon's head sword. Now with a body and a murder weapon, Rodas's guilt was cemented. The judge gave Rodas a total of 55 years in prison. So if it wasn't for this investigator, Rodas's crime might have gone unpunished. But what happens when a nonviolent offender gets the harshest punishment imaginable? This is Jeff Mazansky, charged with taking part in a drug deal in Jefferson City, Missouri. In 1996, police conducted a raid on a known Mexican drug cartel hotspot and caught 40-year-old Mazansky in the middle of buying 6 pounds of marijuana from a cartel leader. Unfortunately, Mazansky already had 2 prior drug charges, and with Missouri's 3 strikes you're out rule, Mazansky was sent straight to prison, this time for life. Mazansky's family, upset at the severity of his crime, petitioned for his release. But for 21 years, nothing happened. Until this. Mazansky did a TV interview where he directly addressed Missouri's state governor.
Why should you go free? Justice is supposed to be fair and equal. In my case, I don't think it was.
After watching the interview, Governor Nixon reviewed Mazansky's case and reclassified it, giving Mazansky the chance to convince a parole board to set him free.
The laws change after someone is sentenced, then you want to give those things a close look.
Finally, after 21 years, Mazansky was a free man. And after all this time behind bars, there's only one thing Mazansky wants to do: campaign for the legalization of marijuana. Mazansky barely evaded a lifelong prison sentence, but would the courts be just as harsh on someone who burned their victim alive? This is Abel Gallegos, who's charged with kidnapping and murder in Golden, Colorado. In 2018, 28-year-old Simone Duran identified a shooting suspect from a police lineup. Days later, Gallegos, who was a fellow gang member of the shooter, lured Duran out of her home, where he shot her 10 times before setting her on fire. The crime was traced back to Gallegos and 2 of his gangster buddies. And in court, Gallegos' family wept while he stared coldly straight ahead. Meanwhile, the victim's 2 young daughters were too traumatized to appear in court.
They miss her and they ask about her every day. They wake up in the middle of the night crying for her.
The judge saw Gallegos' callousness, and he wouldn't let it slide.
This was a horrific crime. I am struck by the casualness in which it was committed, the absolute disregard for human life.
This is the moment Gallegos learned his fate.
This is the result. This is where you will end up, with your family and friends crying as you're let out of the courtroom to serve the rest of your life in prison. But I'm going to impose the maximum sentence just because you deserve it.
In addition, Gallegos' 2 co-conspirators received over 150 years each.